So I thought I'd do a solo podcast today talking about the top news story, or at least one of the top news stories, which is the new vaccine mandates that President Biden announced yesterday, as well as related to that, the Los Angeles school board approved requiring all students 12 and up to be vaccinated. And I wanted to talk about this, obviously, because it's a top story, and obviously because it's important and it's relevant, but also because I think that it's the exact type of story and situation that can lead to a lot of trouble. I'm not talking about this because I think I have the answers. I'm not talking about this because I think there's an objective, true answer to this, right? And there's an obvious way to go. I'm talking about it much in the spirit as I do for most of these videos because I think there's a lot of nuance and complexity. There's certainly a lot of emotion. There's certainly a lot of strong, opinionated feelings, and that's a recipe for trouble, right? So I wanted to talk through it, and for what it's worth, just share how I'm kind of thinking about it to help myself work through it, but maybe for others, just give a different perspective or try and model a little bit how you might try and get different perspectives on this, how you might try and consider different ways. Because I think for many people, not all, but for a lot of people, we come into it with a preconceived view, some assumption, some bias around it, whether it's that Joe Biden and the Democrats and the government in general is dangerous and we can't trust them, and this idea of mandates is a huge problem and a huge risk to our civil liberties, or on the other side, right, that this virus and this pandemic is one of the most dangerous things we've ever faced in the world. And if we don't do something about it, like virus mandates or vaccine mandates, people are going to die. And people that aren't vaccinated are stupid and selfish and stubborn and all that, right? And even as I say it, I don't even necessarily believe those things, but I can feel myself getting worked up because it's just such an easy thing to do. So let's talk about what actually happened here. So the story I've been reading, because I try and read the AP news just because it's somewhat less biased. Everything's got some degree of bias. It is talking about Biden's speech yesterday, where he said, we're in a tough stretch. And I guess I should start by saying what he actually announced was sweeping federal vaccine requirements, which is going to impact as many as 100 million Americans. And the rule, I guess, put in place is that private companies with over 100 employees are required to either have their employees vaccinated or weekly testing in place. And if they don't, I think there's a $14,000 fine per infraction. So if they don't follow it, and that's expected to impact 100 million Americans. When Biden spoke yesterday and gave some of his rationale for it, a lot of it was geared around the idea that, and these are his words, a quote from the AP, we've been patient, but our patience is wearing thin, and your refusal, the you're referring to those that are unvaccinated, has cost all of us, he said. The unvaccinated minority can cause a lot of damage, and they are. So let's start there. So the view here, at least from the president, and I guess from the government, is that unvaccinated people are a problem. There's a sentiment that this pandemic might be over, or at least we'd be in much better shape if everybody was vaccinated. The logic of that is pretty straightforward. There's a virus out there. There's a Delta variant, as we're being told, that's more easily spread. And when you aren't vaccinated, it's more likely you're going to get it, and it's easier then to spread. Furthermore, when you're not vaccinated, you're more likely to have a serious case. So you're more likely to have to go to the hospital and have serious issues, perhaps even death. Those are all bad things. We don't want those things. But let's kind of lay out. Let's start by let's try and get all sides, right? Let's try and lay out all the considerations and not make a statement or stake in the ground about which side is right or which side is wrong, right? So that's one piece of it. There is also a piece of it, which is that those that are vaccinated can have what they call breakthrough. They can get the virus as kind of a breakthrough. So it breaks through the vaccine and you still get it. And in theory, if there's people that aren't vaccinated and they more easily get it, now it's out there, it's more prevalent, it increases the odds that even if you're vaccinated, you might have a breakthrough case and you might get sick. Now, from what I'm hearing and seeing, and it's very hard to find actual data on this, but those that are vaccinated, they're less likely to get the virus. And when they do, they're far less likely to get really sick or hospitalized or have death or any other serious issues with it. So on the one hand, let's break this down logically. So if you're Joe Biden, on the surface, what you're saying is, I'm trying to keep people safe. Okay. Who are you trying to keep safe? Well, I'm trying to keep everybody safe. So let's break those into two groups, the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. I think where the logic runs into a little bit of trouble, right? And this is just one perspective on it, is that if you take the vaccinated, what you're saying is, I want everybody vaccinated because the vaccine is what's going to help keep us safe. But even if you are vaccinated, you're in danger. That's why I need everybody vaccinated, because you're putting everybody at risk. But people that are vaccinated are less likely to get the virus, and if they do, they're less likely to get really sick. Now, less likely is an important term, right? Because that's a relative term. Less likely still means there's risk there. So it's fair to be concerned about that. But you can't have it both ways, right? You can't talk out of both sides of your mouth. You can't say the vaccine is key. We need everybody vaccinated because that's going to be the key to helping and saving people and stopping this virus. But then say that the fact that people aren't vaccinated and the virus is still out there, the problem is they're putting vaccinated people at risk, and it's a problem for them because those two things seem incompatible. Now, again, it's nuanced. It's not completely incompatible. The virus being more prevalent does increase the likelihood of a breakthrough for somebody vaccinated, but everything suggests it's much lower degree of risk around that. So how much is this really helping vaccinated people and keeping them safe? Because either they are at risk of getting sick, and then the vaccine's maybe not effective as we thought it was, and then what are we worried about? Or they're not at risk of getting sick, or at least severely sick, and then it's not nearly as big of a deal, right? Then they're not in as much danger. That's an argument that somebody's going to make. So you have to think about that when you're laying all this out. You have to be honest and kind of address that. And again, I think there is a response. There is a view of risk is still risk. Even if it's lower risk or less risk, it's still a risk to the vaccinated person. So fair enough. But the question becomes, is the risk great enough where it requires this type of really major, significant mandate, especially when you understand the environment you're in and how divisive it is and how so many people are skeptical and concerned that the government is forcing people to do things and they're not comfortable with that? Is the risk to the vaccinated people that high that this type of mandate is required? It's a question, right? It's a question in my mind. Should be a question in everybody's mind. Then you go to the next side of it, right? Okay, well, he's also trying to protect the unvaccinated people. And I think the latest estimate is that it's like 80 million people that are eligible that aren't vaccinated. So there's some 80 million people. And the rhetoric in Biden's speech was pretty strong. He wasn't happy with those people. We've been patient, but we're going to be patient no longer. You're putting everybody at risk. So there's kind of a scolding happening there, which right off the bat, you can kind of take that and say, well, if your objective is to get these people to listen, scolding them, insulting them, especially when they're already skeptical of you and they feel like they can't trust you, that's part of the reason why they're not getting vaccinated. Not sure that's the best approach. But perhaps he feels like, hey, heavy-handed, bring out the stick. For people that maybe aren't that passionate about it, but they've just been lazy or they're more casually anti-vaccination in this case, maybe this will push them to do it. But still, the underlying logic is that so now I'm speaking as Joe Biden or the government, I'm trying to protect these people ultimately from themselves, right? It's from the virus, but it's from themselves. If people have had the opportunity to get vaccinated and they've chosen not to, and you're saying, well, I'm doing this to protect you, it gets into a really weird, interesting philosophical question. Do you have the right to protect me from myself? Who are you to say that I have to do this to keep me safe, right? If your rationale is you're trying to keep me safe, what gives you the right to decide that? And is it especially the government's job, nevertheless anybody's job, to tell me how I should keep myself safe? Because if you start going down that road, you could start telling me a lot of things, right? Maybe I shouldn't be allowed to eat certain foods that I eat. Maybe I shouldn't be able to stare at my phone as much as I do. Maybe I should be required to take certain vitamins. Maybe I should be required to exercise a certain amount each day. And this is where it gets tricky, right? And apologies, I know I'm jumping a little bit, but it speaks to the complexity of this. For a lot of people that are skeptical of the government, that's a part of it. They're saying, listen, you're concerned about me, so you say, and I'll take your word for that. So you're requiring me to get a vaccine that I'm not sure is safe and I'm not really fully comfortable with, but you're requiring it because you're so worried about keeping me safe. You're so worried about the healthcare system as a whole, right? Because that is a part of it. The more people that get sick, the more people that go in the hospital. It does have kind of second level impact of now the hospital's overwhelmed. Now they can't treat their regular patients, right? Get all that. That's fair. Let's assume that's true. But why are you just worried about the virus? Why are you just worried about putting mandates in place to keep me safe from the virus? What about all the other risks out there, right? You can go down the line of different things, different things that cause cancer, opioids, right? A big thing. Obviously, there's things being done about that, but not at this level, right? Not this heavy-handed to try and fix the issue. And there are arguably as many people, if not more people, dying from that. And then just take the simple stuff, as I was referring to. If it's about health, if it's about the healthcare system and keeping people healthy and safe and protecting them from themselves, well, arguably, you should be requiring everybody to exercise. You should be requiring everybody to take certain vitamins. You should be requiring everybody to eat a certain diet. It's just, this is the beauty, in my mind, of this mathematical type logic. It cuts through all the nonsense. It cuts through a lot of the cognitive outs we want to give ourselves, a lot of the stories and the narratives, and it tries to get to the root, to the first principles of it. Mathematically, if it's true that your objective is to keep Americans safe and you don't trust that they're capable of doing it themselves, why is it just when it comes to the virus that you're trying to employ that? That's an argument a lot of people are going to make, a lot of people. And people are going to be cynical and they're going to be skeptical. And they're going to say, well, let me think. What is a reason why you would do that? Possibly it's that the virus is that much more dangerous. Possibly, right? The nature of it, possible. It's a hard sell for a lot of people because there's a lot of people dying from other things. There's a lot of people severely ill or in bad shape health-wise and costing the health system a lot of money for lots of other reasons, obesity, among other things, right? There's lots of things at play. So that's a hard sell to say it's just the virus, although it's part of it. A lot of people then go to the place of, well, a lot of people will go to the place of it's the government just trying to take over, right? They're trying to become a dictatorship. They're trying to take away our rights and our liberties. And although I personally don't think that is the main priority and the main focus, I don't think there's a bunch of people sitting in a room trying to plan that out. I don't know for sure. That's for sure, right? It's possible. I just don't think it's highly likely, just given what I've seen. But it's still a concern, right? You can't just dismiss that and write it off, because as soon as you do that, that's when something like that happens. If somebody is looking to do that, or if somebody does fall into a scenario where they have the opportunity to do that, it's when the guard's down, it's when nobody's worried about it, that would happen. So I firmly believe it is the right thing to keep a healthy level of like deterrent and skepticism and questioning around it to prevent it from happening, right? To keep people away from that happening. So I do think there's something there. But most likely, I think where a lot of reasonable people will go, and in this article, there's actually an endorsement. I think it's I forget the name of it now, but the Business Roundtable, a pretty big group that represents businesses across the U.S., was supportive of this mandate that Biden put forward. So you look at that and you say, okay, is that what's going on here? Is that what this is about? Because the virus is still out there to some extent and people are getting sick, even if they're okay with it, the unvaccinated, even if they're not worried about getting sick, even if they're happy to take on that risk and they're making a conscious, deliberate, thoughtful decision, it's putting people's money at risk, right? Businesses can't open up fully. Hiring can't go to where it needs to go to. The numbers look bad, right? Unemployment's too high. We have all sorts of spending that has to happen around it. That's the other place people go. That's all this is about. This is about money. You don't care about saving people and helping people. If you did, again, you'd put mandates in place for all these types of things. You're just worried about the virus because it's taking away from business right now. Businesses can't operate the way they'd like to. Now, again, I'm not saying that's the case. I'm saying a couple things, though. I'm saying you have to entertain the possibility of those scenarios, particularly that scenario as being one of them, right? None of us can say for certain that that's not what's happening. And the follow-on to that is, if you are Joe Biden, or you're somebody on the side that's trying to convince people to get vaccinated, or trying to force people to get vaccinated in some cases, if your objective is as such, you have to think about what's the reality of the situation and what's the most logical actions I could take to make that happen. And the better you understand the other side, the better you understand the person or the people you're trying to influence, those that aren't vaccinated, the better you can speak to them, the better you can take the actions that are most logical to get them towards the outcome you want. And I would make an argument that I don't know that that's happening here. Now, who am I to say? I'm not in these conversations. Obviously, I'm by no means an expert, but it's just something to consider. Are you truly understanding their perspective? Are you, Joe Biden or whoever else, entertaining the possibility that maybe they're right? Maybe they shouldn't get vaccinated. Maybe there's more risk in that. Or maybe they're worried about civil liberties and that point is important enough that they're going to hold out on it. Maybe that's okay. You have to entertain that possibility, right? You have to be willing to accept that that might be true. If for some reason, or you've done the work and you do the thinking and the analysis and you say, I understand that argument, but I don't buy it. I think it's a net negative argument where people are still going to be harmed from this. So I want to push forward. That doesn't then give you free reign, or shouldn't give you free reign to just say, okay, I'm going to force it. I think you still have to convince those people. You have to help them see what you see. Now, that's not to say they haven't tried that. I know there's been lots of marketing efforts and campaigns and all sorts of incentives put in place to try and get people to get vaccinated. But if it's not working, I don't think, just like you would tell a child, the answer isn't, well, you just demand you get what you want. You have to keep trying to figure it out. You have to keep looking and see where to go from there. So let me switch gears a little bit, because that's kind of the argument as I read that story of where that starts to go. As I start to think about things that maybe could be done differently on, the government side, those trying to get the vaccine to happen. That's a perspective I think they need to understand of those that aren't vaccinated. It's not to say that they're right, the people that aren't vaccinated. It's not to say anybody's right or wrong here. This, for me, is about getting clarity on the situation. What are the different perspectives? What are the different things to consider? What are the things that might help me get to the outcome I want? So let's do the same thing on the other side now. I think for a lot of those people that are either unvaccinated or are very bothered, right? Because there's lots of people that even are vaccinated that are concerned and bothered by this mandate. People that feel like, again, this is the government overstepping. They're doing it just for money. They're doing it just for control or power. They're being hypocritical in how they're approaching it, right? All these things. The same thing, right? It's the same story. It's very easy on that side, particularly if you stay kind of in an echo chamber and you're just kind of reading your news and you're watching, a certain Fox News or whatever it is, and you're just looking at your Facebook feed, and you start to kind of build this narrative and this story in your head that becomes almost an objective fact in your mind, that the government is doing something evil here, doing something that's trying to hurt us. Now, the reality is, just like we talked about, maybe that's the case. And I think it's good to keep up a healthy defense against that. But you can't just blindly believe that, right? And one of the phrases I often use is, which I think is an important one, which you'll hear often in this type of discussion, is sheep, right? Don't be a sheep. Don't just do what the government tells you to do. Don't be a sheep and just blindly follow that. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. But I would also argue, don't be a sheep to a different shepherd, because that's what happens when you just blindly disagree or are cynical about everything the government says or anything in that vein. If you just, without even thinking about it anymore, just have this hardened belief that anything they tell me I think is a lie or is conspiracy or is a problem, it might be. But if you just blindly believe it, well, now you're just a sheep to a different shepherd. You have to be thoughtful. You have to think through it. And the argument I would make here is, and it's hard on both sides to kind of empathize and understand the other perspective. But that's the job. That's the work you have to do if you want to get to the best possible outcome. If your goal is to get as close to objective truth as possible, which should be everybody's goal in theory, then that's the work you have to do. And I think it's too easy to just assume everybody on the left or the government or wherever it is, those pushing the medical community, those pushing for the vaccine, that they're evil or that they're trying to do something bad. Are they perfect? No, nobody's perfect. Are there inconsistencies? Sure, we've already highlighted some of them. But I do think we have to entertain the possibility that there's a lot of people that are really just trying to do the right thing. They genuinely believe that this virus is a huge problem and a huge danger. It's not that there's not other dangers. It's not that there's not other problems. But right now, this is a major one, right? The virus is dangerous. It spreads so easily. We've seen the toll it's taken on people, on families, on the healthcare system, on hospitals, right? All over the world. We would be crazy. We would be irresponsible not to do everything we could do to try and stop this virus, right? It's very hard to fix the obesity problem, arguably, right? It's an argument they might make. There's a lot that goes into that. There's a lot of overstepping on civil liberties you'd have to do. And even then, not sure you'd solve the problem. Same thing with other things like cancer. It's hard to know exactly how we fix it, how we stop it. It's so complex. But with this virus and what they believe, and again, I'm not saying that they're right, but I'm saying I think in trying to understand what they believe we have a really valuable tool to stop this virus. And I think for at least a good portion of people from that side, That's the goal. Like if we can help people, that's what we want to do. We want to help people. And we can't help everybody. I get that. And it's not a guarantee. I get that. But if this vaccine can really help save a lot of lives and help save our healthcare workers and frontline workers and all that stuff and help get us back to a place that feels more like normal, where we can comfortably spend time with our families, we should do that. We should do that. And that's what it's coming from. It's coming from a place of, I want to help people. And I get it's complex and I get some people are concerned, but they may not fully understand it. And I would hate for them or somebody in their family or somebody to get sick and die because of that. So if we have to take this kind of heavy-handed step, and I would imagine for some people, they take it begrudgingly, they take it knowing what it represents, and they don't like it. They don't like the overstep on civil liberties, but it feels like the net positive thing to do. That's what it really feels like for them. And I think it's important to understand that and to appreciate that perspective. It doesn't mean you have to agree with it. It doesn't mean you have to go along with it. But it's very important to try and keep a degree of objectivity. To try and get true clarity on the situation, you have to understand it. And in that case, if you can appreciate that, at least in some people, then who knows, right? Sticking with Joe Biden, who's in the article, I'm not in his head. I can't know for sure. And you could ask 100 different people, depending on their political background and all that stuff. You get a lot of different answers. Is he genuine? Is he not? Is he competent? Is he not? Is he really trying to help people? Is he not? I don't know. Obviously, I can't know. But I at least have to entertain the possibility that the anger, right? Some of the anger in his tone and his words and the strong actions that he's taking, at least a portion of it is intended to try and help people. I'd have to believe, I have to at least entertain the possibility that he's not an evil, bad person. He might just see the world differently. And in this scenario, he genuinely believes that he has the opportunity to help people and to save a lot of lives. And I think if you can appreciate that, again, it might help you to deal with this situation better and understand it a little bit better. Doesn't mean you have to go along with it. Doesn't mean you have to do it. But there's at least a valid argument to be made there. The vaccine does seem to be somewhat effective. It does seem to help some people. It does seem to have some impact. Nothing is 100%, but there seems to be a lot of data. There seems to be a lot of science behind it. So don't just jump to the conclusion that this is all evil, this is all a conspiracy. It might be, right? I'm not saying don't think that. I'm not saying it's not possibly true. I'm saying just do the work. Don't take that easy out to just assume that that's the case. Just like I wouldn't want people on the other side to take the easy out of assuming that people that are unvaccinated are just stupid or selfish and we need to force them and save them from themselves. Just like I wouldn't want anybody to assume, well, the vaccine's magic. Like you get it and everybody's healthy. Like we don't know. It's too new. We don't know the long-term impacts. We clearly don't know how effective it is. We clearly don't know how much it's going to protect us for how long from different variants. So anybody that's claiming certainty, and that's probably my big thesis in all this, because I think when you're dealing with a situation like this, certainty is always one of the core root issues. It's the thing that drives so many of the problems. Because on either side, as soon as you think you've achieved certainty, that, well, the vaccine's the answer. It's going to fix everything. It's got to be. It works. Everybody should get it. Bullshit. You don't know that. None of us know that. Any scientist or doctor who's really worth it and knows what he's talking about or she's talking about is going to be the first one to say, based on the information we have, this seems like the best way to go. But there's risks, there's uncertainty. So don't make pretend there's certainty where there's not. Same thing on somebody that's saying, I know the government's just full of shit. I know they're just trying to take over power. I know they're just trying to control our lives. I know they're just trying to make money. I know there's just businesses and greed behind this. Maybe. It's possible. It's definitely possible. I wouldn't be shocked by that at all. But you don't know that. None of us know that for sure. We don't have absolute proof of that. So don't act as if you do. Act as if that's your most likely scenario and what you think might be happening, and certainly do the work to figure that out. But don't jump to the conclusion that it's definitely that. We can't jump to those conclusions. And when reading an article like this, when kind of listening to this type of news story, I think that's got to be the first step, or one of the first steps, is try and be as objective as you possibly can. Try and have humility, ultimately. Try and be humble enough to entertain the idea that your instinctual view or your first pass view, or even if you've done a lot of work and you've thought through it, that view could still be wrong. There could still be more to it. There could be things we don't know. There could be a perspective that you haven't thought of. You could have a blind spot. You could have a bias. There could be a whole host of things. So that's kind of how I think about the story. Where I land on it ultimately, right, which is a question, Obviously, I don't have any certainty. I can't say for sure what the right solution is here. There's part of me that looks at it and says, many of us are vaccinated. If not, well, I don't know how many of us are vaccinated, exact percentage, but a lot of people are vaccinated. A lot of people's kids are vaccinated. I know my kid is vaccinated. I know I am, on all sorts of different things. So that's important, right? Just logically to step back. And if you look at this in isolation, you say, oh, they're requiring us to do something. They're requiring us to get some medical procedure, get some vaccine and stick a needle in our arm. Well, that's not unprecedented. There are aspects of it, right? The speed at which they're doing it, the uncertainty around the vaccine. I get that. But the idea of forcing kids to get vaccines, the idea of forcing certain people to get vaccinated for certain dangerous diseases or viruses, that's not something that's unheard of. So let's not exaggerate and jump to an extreme and make pretend this is uncharted territory. It's not, right? So that's important to kind of lay out. Now, let's identify what is seemingly unique about it, right? This type of mandate where you're requiring companies to force their employees to do this. Probably still not unheard of, right? The government does things like this. But it is being done in a way and with a rhetoric that seems particularly heavy-handed. So I don't want to dismiss that, but I do want to acknowledge that vaccines aren't unheard of. I will say also, though, that so I got COVID while being vaccinated. It wasn't particularly serious, but I did get it. And there's certainly a lot of stories out there, and this is what we were talking about before. There is a concern of vaccinated people getting sick. So it at least begs the question. It at least has to give you a healthy degree of skepticism to say, well, why are we so confident in the vaccine? Why are we so sure it works if we're so concerned about it and people are still getting sick? My sense is it's probably effective. It probably does its job to keep people from getting really sick. Now, if that's the case, then sure, right? The more people vaccinated, the better in that regard. But it does at least open the door to the question of, if it's working and doing its job, why are we so concerned about those people that aren't vaccinated? That's a hard thing for me to come off of. This idea that inherent in this whole thing is a belief that we, the government, Joe Biden, whoever it is, doctors, know better and have the right to tell you what to do to save you from yourself. That is just a really hard argument for me to get behind. I have limited information, so probably the answer for me is I need to do a little bit more work before I draw a conclusion on this. But I think I got vaccinated. I do understand the value of the vaccine. I do think that it is helping to keep some people safe, but I think anything we're never certain of. So without certainty, and then with that added assumption at play now of how this is being approached, where it's saying we're going to save you from yourself and we know better than you, that's a really hard thing for me to get behind, because it feels like implicit in that is certainty. There's an arrogance and a certainty in it that somebody knows better than me, and that the government has the right to say, I know better, you have to do this. And if we start getting into that, if we start setting that precedent, which some would argue we already have with lots of different things the government requires us to do, and things like that, taxes as an example, we know better how to spend your money. That's a risky proposition. So I guess where I'd land on this is that I think there should be a healthy degree of skepticism. I think anybody that says somebody that's not vaccinated is a moron or an idiot or evil or selfish, you're sacrificing the truth for simplicity completely, because there's too many good reasons to be skeptical of getting vaccinated. And we've talked about a lot of them today. So you have to have empathy and humility around that and consider that might be the case. And the same thing would hold for the other side. Anybody that's saying there's no way I would ever get vaccinated, there's no way if the government tells me to do something, I'm ever going to do it. Same thing. There's not enough empathy and humility and understanding in that. You're not using enough kind of big L logic in that scenario to come to that conclusion. So probably where I land is, at the end of the day, who am I to tell anybody to do anything? I'm not an expert. I have no certainty on this. So I think people should make their own decisions. Unless there is clear, really, really, really strong evidence that somebody not getting vaccinated is putting somebody else at risk, right? If me not getting vaccinated, it seems abundantly clear, is putting somebody else at severe risk, then I think that's something we have to then start to consider in what we do. And to my point earlier, I think there's a lot of people that believe that's the case. They believe that's the situation we're in, and that's why they're pushing so hard on these mandates. I would just say, from my perspective, the math, right, the data, the evidence, it doesn't seem clear enough. And a lot of the problem in that is that it's so hard to get good information. It's so hard to know what to trust. Because somebody could respond to me and say, are you crazy? I could show you all sorts of different evidence that shows you why this is obviously a risk to lots of people. And I would love to see that and get into it. But the world we live in today, where so many people, the loudest voices, are jumping to extreme views and claiming certainty when they haven't earned it, it makes it really hard to get to that information. And it makes it really cloudy and really murky and a lack of clarity to where I or anybody could feel like, oh, okay, I have the information. Now I can make kind of a logical, rational decision. The information just isn't out there. So in conclusion, I guess what I'll say on that is it speaks to the importance of this approach to me. This approach of being objective, of having empathy for the other side and trying to really understand the other perspective, of really entertaining the possibility that you might have it wrong or might be missing it, right? Having that humility and trying to be as kind of mathematically logical as possible, following the evidence, following the data, following the information, right? And letting that be the guide. If we do that, I think the rhetoric, I think the conversations, I think the information that's out there becomes so much more valuable, so much more insightful, so much clearer, and so much easier for people to digest so that they can make more educated decisions. We're still not going to be able to control everybody. People are still going to have their own perspectives and see things differently. But at least we can have some confidence that the information that's out there is as close or closer to the objective truth than it is today, where it's just two sides kind of screaming extremes at each other, claiming certainty, making these kind of bold, unvalidated assumptions that make everybody just not trust anything. And then you really get people that just are acting on instinct or emotion, and that's not what we want. We want people acting on logic. But for them to do that, you need to give them good information. So it's the responsibility of the politicians, the business leaders, the medical community, the media, all these people, to appreciate the nuance, to appreciate the complexity of this, to understand the other side's perspective. That is your responsibility. If you really care about helping people, if you really care about making the world a better place, right? The vaccine may or may not be a great start, right? We've had that conversation, but that piece of it, doing your job, keeping yourself accountable to that responsibility to try and give people the clear, objective truth as best as you can, to do that work, right? To ensure that you're doing the work that works towards getting to the truth, not some other objective that benefits you or your business or somebody else, right? Or just not being lazy, not allowing your biases and your blind spots that you might not even be aware of to show through and cause a problem, right? We all have a responsibility to question and challenge ourselves and find that we all have them. None of us are perfect, right? That's the key piece of it, back to the mathematical nature of it. Unless you believe you're perfect, right? Which none of us should. Unless you believe you're 100% in your assessment of everything, you see everything completely clearly, you get stuff wrong. You have blind spots, you have biases. So you have to assume, by nature of how those work, you don't know when they're happening. It might be this topic. It might be this instance. It might be about conspiracies against the government. It might be about unvaccinated people and what they think. You have to entertain that. You have to consider this might be the one that I'm missing. And you have to do the work to question and challenge and do all that thinking, not to get to a certainty, because you never will, but to give yourself the best chance, right? To give yourself the best chance to get to the most logical outcome and conclusion. And that's hard work. There's no other way to put it. It's not easy. It's not something you could do overnight. It's not something you could shortcut. It's a simple concept. Do the work, think through it, challenge yourself and all that. But overcoming your own ego, overcoming our own mental things, and just finding the energy, frankly, to do that work is hard. But again, if the claim is that we want to help people, if the claim is that we're trying to do the right thing, which I think most people are, that's the work that just has to be done.